VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us today here on Crosstalk. Folks, increasingly, people across this nation are being becoming very concerned by the integrity of the vote taking place across the nation. Concerns over fraud, concerns over illegal voting, concerns over multiple voting, concerns over voter impersonation, and concerns regarding the integrity of this upcoming election are of growing significance. We're going to be talking about that today, and it's our privilege to have with us James O'Keefe, the founder and director of Project Veritas. The mission that they have is to investigate and expose corruption, dishonesty, self-dealing, waste, fraud, and other misconduct in both public and private institutions in order to achieve a more ethical and transparent society. They're a nonprofit organization which seeks to inform the public of wrongdoing and to allow the public to make judgments on these issues. James, thank you so much for joining us today on Crosstalk.
Thanks for taking the time to highlight this important issue.
You've been involved in a number of investigative journalistic matters pertaining to voter fraud. Why have you narrowed your focus here of recent on this topic?
Well, I think it's an election year, and we looked at the issue back in January, and we first examined. It was a pretty simple issue. Just we wanted to see how vulnerable our election system was to potential fraud. And we did something pretty interesting. We cross-referenced dead people with registered voters back in January and found that there were many people who were dead and registered to vote. We proceeded to go to poll locations and determined that the ballots could be offered willy-nilly up to just about anyone who walked into the poll locations. And so that got us on this train, and
but yeah,
all year we've been doing it.
Yeah, at the same time, we're told that voter fraud just doesn't exist.
Well, the Pew Research Center, which is a nonpartisan organization, has highlighted the fact that there's, millions of people registered to vote in two places, and I think that the thing about our videos, the reason why they're really so effective is because, visuals don't lie. It's a matter of fact that what you're watching here is real, it's visceral, it's true, and whether or not you think it exists or not, it's caught on tape, and it's pretty undeniable.
Well, let's talk about your most recent investigation that took you to the state of Virginia, and someone by the name of Patrick Moran. Who is he, and what did you uncover?
We were in Arlington, Virginia, focused on a larger investigation surrounding Organizing for America, which is Barack Obama's re-election campaign, and we caught on tape the son of a sitting congressman, his name is Patrick Moran, counseling us on how to forge documents, impersonate other voters, impersonate pollsters to determine voter inactivity, and even go so far as to use lawyers from the Democratic National Committee to defend the forged documents if they look good enough. Well, Patrick Moran was the son of sitting Congressman James Moran, and this gentleman on tape is paid by his father's campaign. The Morans in the state of Virginia are centered to a power nexus. His uncle runs the DNC in Virginia. His father's a congressman, and he himself runs the campaign. So he resigned. Patrick Moran resigned from his father's campaign. The cops, the police in Arlington, Virginia, have launched a criminal investigation, and now the Attorney General of Virginia has been asked by the State Board of Elections to investigate wrongdoing in our undercover video.
Okay, now that's interesting because I think it was late last week that the Attorney General from Virginia came out and said, hey, there's no indication any offense took place here.
That's right. He was on, I believe, WMAL shortly after the video was released. But what makes matters really interesting is just less than 24 hours before we released this undercover tape of Patrick Moran, his father, Jim Moran, asked Attorney General Cuccinelli to investigate a Republican incident of voter fraud, and came out hard just a day before. And I could not have predicted that. I didn't know that he would do that. But then just 24 hours later, we released a tape showing his son and field director engaged in a potential scenario. Now, Cuccinelli has said in one interview that he doesn't know if there's an offense, and that's because with undercover video, each state has different conspiracy requirements. If you're undercover, you're not actually a criminal; you're just posing as one. So there are legal questions here. I'm not a lawyer, but there are legal questions about the nature of criminal intent when you are talking to an actor about committing a crime.
What has been the public's reaction to your video, the public in Virginia in particular?
The public has been outraged. People are livid that this stuff is happening, and they're very thankful that Project Veritas has been doing this investigation. And they're frankly upset at the mainstream media. They're upset that the media won't do the job, and they're wanting more of these incidents uncovered. And we're a small charity group. We're tax exempt, and we do what we can. But people want us to do it more, and they want answers from the congressman and from the DNC. Now, the DNC chairwoman, her name is Debbie Wasserman Schultz, was on CNN with Sullivan O'Brien, and she actually admitted that this was inexcusable, this advice from Patrick Moran.
Now,
now we want answers from the congressman right now.
Yeah, let's review some of that advice again, because I think it's important for people to really have in mind how it is that Mr. Moran was actually advising this person posing as one who was going to commit fraud.
Yes, we basically confronted him in a restaurant or a cafeteria in Arlington and walked outside and just told him right up front, we want to commit fraud. And he initially was like, well, maybe it's easier if you just tell the people to vote. And we actually said, no, we want to make sure we do this because, we want to get an abortion and, our girlfriend's pregnant. So we're basically playing up the meme about birth control and the war against women. And that, frankly, got him on board to do this fraud. And he said, this is Patrick Moran, field director for Moran for Congress. He told us what we need to do is forge the documents using like a program like Microsoft Word, and we'd have to make sure they look good. And if they do look good, if those forged utility bills, because remember in Virginia you need more proof because the voter requirements are stricter. In order to forge the utility documents, you need something that looks good. And if it does look good, then he would potentially have his legal counsel defend us.
Yeah, and that is something I found very astounding, that his suggestion that if these fraudulent voters had problems at the polls, that an Obama for an American lawyer or another Democratic lawyer would be on hand there to provide help. I mean, that's rather concerning. That
is particularly why the police are getting involved, and the State Board of Elections have asked the Attorney General to get involved. Now, I don't know whether this is technically illegal or not. Remember, in 2009, the Acorn undercover videos, which we did, the Acorn employees were not breaking the law. That doesn't mean they were doing nothing wrong. There's a distinction. It just means that in some jurisdictions, it's not technically illegal to give people advice on how to break the law if you're talking to someone who's undercover. The federal, the FBI, they have different standards because they're the feds, and their legal requirements. There's this whole doctrine of law about inchoate offenses and lack of scientor and criminal intent. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Attorney General does here.
Is it true that Mr. Moran actually suggested that a person who's seeking to be involved in fraud should first contact the people and act like a pollster to disguise themselves over the phone to contact these people?
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. As we're walking back to the campaign office in Arlington, and he actually invites our videographer back up to his office, and we're walking into, it's not me actually, it's my colleague, he was walking into the elevator in this campaign office, and Patrick Moran advised our undercover reporter that he would have to impersonate pollsters to call the inactive voters ahead of time to make the determination if they were in fact going to vote. Because what you don't want to have happen if you're committing fraud, in their minds, is you don't want to go to the polling, the voting booth, and find out that the people have already voted. So he was actually giving us creative counsel on how to determine if the people that we were voting in their names would be voting, and the way to do that would be to impersonate pollsters. Clearly, this is advice from somebody who is actively encouraging the fraud and not just playing along as he is now claiming he was doing.
Do you anticipate the Attorney General will bring forth any information prior to the election next week?
I don't know. I don't have information about what the Attorney General's plans are. I did hear him on WMAL there in Virginia, basically telling the state that he didn't think that any crimes were committed. He was making the arguments I just made about lack of scientor. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't even know, frankly, what that exactly means. But it has something to do with the specific nature of criminal intent and the advanced steps that people are taking. It may not be illegal, the advice that he gave, but it's a window into the soul of voter fraud in the United States.
Politico carried a story stating that Moran insisted that this whole interchange with the undercover reporter was just a joke to him, that he stepped down, though, from his father's campaign so he wouldn't be a distraction to the election. Do you buy this story, that it was just a joke?
Well, you don't even have to, ask me that question. You could take a look at all my typical adversaries, my critics in the press, places like Salon.com, places like Slate.com, Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, and even George Soros' Media Matters. Every single one of those organizations I just mentioned have praised this video or not said a word. In fact, Slate called it one of the most important pieces of journalism in 2012. So even my critics and adversaries are coming out and saying that this is actually revealing and important. We've had organizations like CNN, Soledad O'Brien, who's not exactly an ally, someone who's promoted my work, has actually been interrogating the chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee on television about this. And the chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, her name is Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she was telling America that this was inexcusable and wrong. And so I don't think this guy was playing along. I mean, if it would be one thing if he was a stranger, it would be one thing if he was off the street, but this guy runs the field program for his father's congressional campaign. That's like the bank teller telling you how to commit fraud at a bank. It's inexcusable.
James O'Keefe is our guest here today as we speak about election fraud. He's with Project Veritas. You have also investigated other Obama campaign workers, including Organizing for America workers who were going to help people who declare they wanted to commit election fraud. Tell us about this story here.
Yeah, for all the people out there who think this is an isolated incident, just 2.5 weeks ago, we visited an Organizing for America office in Houston, Texas, and caught a regional field director, that's her title, by the name of Stephanie Caballero, who runs the Houston, Texas Organizing for America, that's Barack Obama's reelection campaign on the grassroots level. Organizing for America regional field director caught on tape facilitating someone to vote twice. And the way that they did it in Houston, Texas was they took an absentee ballot application from the state of Florida, and she gave it to our undercover reporter in the state of Texas. And she told her to lie and to tell people that she didn't know the rules. The rules being, obviously, it's a felony to vote twice. And say you didn't know what the rules were. She gave her an absentee ballot application in the state of Texas to vote in Florida.
We're going to continue with this latest report here in just a moment. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Election fraud is our topic. Our guest, James O'Keefe. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, does ICR believe in plate tectonics?
No doubt about it, Chris. The Earth's surface is divided up into plates. Whether or not the plates moved apart in the past is a matter of historical reconstruction, but the concept does explain an awful lot of geologic data. If you go to the ICR website, www.icr.org, and click on the Research button, there are a number of very technical articles on what we call catastrophic plate tectonics. Over the years, we've done a great deal of research on this, and we're convinced that a rapid spreading of the continents was part of the flood itself, and certainly necessary for ending the flood. The Bible doesn't give us all the details, but the framework we read back in Genesis seems to be the one that fits the data.
To find out more about creation science, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Our topic is election fraud, and we're talking with James O'Keefe, the founder and director of Project Veritas. They've done a lot of undercover investigation and exposing of corruption, dishonesty, waste, fraud, abuse, and so on, and misconduct in both the public and private institutions. We're talking about some of their undercover work as far as it relates to the integrity of the vote and the intention to bring about voter fraud, and those who are willing to assist or very active in the assisting of that. You were talking about a situation with going into Organizing for America headquarters and actually having people there who knew that they were going to assist somebody, James, that was going to commit voter fraud by securing for them an out-of-state voter application there for registration while at the same time voting manually in another location?
That's right. This is a video on YouTube with about 500,000 views. We did 2.5 weeks ago. It's a Barack Obama regional field director for his grassroots campaign reelection. Her name is Stephanie Caballero. And it was all over the news locally in Houston, Texas. Of course, the national media didn't think it was newsworthy, but she resigned. She was fired, actually, one or the other. Sometimes you can't tell which, from Organizing for America. She was a full-time paid. We got her salary off the FEC disclosure forms, and she was fired for telling my undercover reporter to vote twice. She was fired, and the office that she was working out of, this is Houston, Texas, Organizing for America headquarters, was shut down. They shut down the office. And a lot of people in Houston, Texas there are out of work now because they decided that this entire thing was corrupt. So this is not isolated. We've done many videos over the last 6 to 10 months. They've resulted in congressional hearings, legislation. Oftentimes, we don't even lobby the politicians to change things. They just see the videos, and the videos are so, frankly, manifestly damning that people decide to do something about it afterwards.
James, what are your thoughts on early voting? Do you believe this opens the door for fraud to take place?
You know, I think that's an interesting question. I don't necessarily. I'm not objecting to the idea of early voting, but I think that leadership, people in state legislators, they have to do something to kind of close the bank vault door. The analogy I make basically is that this is like a bank vault. You know, voting is incredibly important. It's sacrosanct in the American tradition. The bank vault door is just swung totally wide open. And what we're doing is filming the fact that it's wide open. And that, in and of itself, is wrong. Mm-hmm. As to what to do about it, that's not my expertise. My expertise is exposing fraud, not creating policy solutions to solve the problems.
Last week in North Carolina, there were a number of voters that complained about their electronic ballot machines casting the wrong vote. One voter said, I voted, she said, for Mitt Romney, but every time she entered her vote, the machine defaulted to President Obama, and it appears that several at that same polling location had the very same problem. Board of Elections director stated the problem comes up, it happens every election, but it can be resolved after the machine is recalibrated by the poll workers. They've said all the machines now have been fixed. Do you have concerns over the aspect of electronic voting and the results that they give?
You know, that's another interesting angle that we have not yet explored, and that's kind of hard to hold those people accountable too. So these are all issues that are great questions, and may be subject to one of our investigations in the future. By the way, a good expert on this is a guy named John Fund, who wrote a book called Who's Counting, and one of the chapters in his book is about electronic voting. Another chapter is about Project Veritas and our efforts in New Hampshire where we exposed the dead people and the deceased. Their names were used to vote. You know, in North Carolina just recently, people over the age of 113 years old, and there's only a couple hundred people in the country, but in North Carolina, magically, there's a few hundred of those people who voted. So I think we need to get to the first step, which is just to agree there is a problem. And frankly, a lot of people in the mainstream media, and they control the flow of information, don't think that this is a problem that exists.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to first address that issue before we start getting into the more advanced issues.
And, at the same time, we have states that are saying, okay, we understand, James, something needs to be done. We are doing something about it. There's a number of states that have enacted things to stop voter ID fraud, or voter fraud by enacting voter ID at the polls. But time and time again, we've got the feds taking steps to stop states from requiring this ID, and it seems to put us in a vicious circle.
That's right. The feds have come out against Texas. They've come out against places like New Hampshire. But in one of the cases that Project Veritas was responsible for, this is in New Hampshire, Attorney General Holder actually let the voter ID law pass, partially because of our video. And as your listeners might know, back in April, we actually went into the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, the guy who's behind all the federal blockage that you're talking about. We went into Eric Holder's own voting precinct, his personal place where he actually cast his ballot, and we said, "Hi, do you have an Eric Holder on your list?" And the poll worker handed us his ballot. They handed us his voting ballot application. In other words, his own ballot is susceptible to fraud.
The Attorney General of the United States. That's you're talking. You said you have his name and Eric Holder, and they actually were going to give you his ballot.
Yep, it's on YouTube. It's got 500,000 views. It was on the Drudge Report. We went into Eric Holder's own voting precinct, and we said, quote, "Hi, do you have an Eric Holder on your list?" Just asking the question. And the poll worker handed us his ballot application. We could have voted in the name of the Attorney General himself.
Wow.
And this video came out in April. It prompted a congressional hearing, 3 of them. So this journalism stuff is really effective. It's visual, it's effective, it's unignorable, it personalizes the issue in a way that nothing else can. So I think we're making some progress here about informing people about this issue.
Do you personally have confidence in the final votes to be reported next week?
No, I don't. Human nature is such that people are going to try to find ways to exploit the system, and human nature is such that it makes people want to do things they're not supposed to do. And as long as we have an open society, these things are going to continue to happen. But like I keep saying, that's why investigative journalism is so important.
Yeah. So people, as they go to the polls between now and next week, some are involved in early voting now. Of course, Tuesday next week being Election Day. Any thoughts what people can do when they see some kind of irregularity happening, if they see some sort of questionable activity? What kind of action can take place on their behalf?
Well, you're talking to a citizen journalist, so I think the most effective thing that a lot of people can do is take out their iPhones, take out their cameras, take out their reporter notebooks, get out their Twitters and start talking about it. Expose it, share it. You could even send me a tip on my tip line. Election Day is going to be a very important event. And if you're listening right now and you have some inside information about some fraud going down in your local community, go to ProjectVeritas.com. Type in the subject matter urgent. Some shenanigans going on in wherever, Minnesota, Florida, Virginia, wherever. Please, James, come to my local jurisdiction and investigate this, because we do have a couple people who work for us that are ready and willing to go investigate these things at a moment's notice.
Okay, again, folks, the website is ProjectVeritas.com. I'm going to spell that for you. Project, Project. Veritas is Veritas. Veritas. ProjectVeritas.org. What does Veritas mean?
It's Veritas.com, by the way.
.com, thank you.
And Veritas is the Latin word for truth. It's, most famously, Veritas vos liberabit, the truth shall set you free. We are firm believers. Our mission is, frankly, somewhat of a unique one. We don't really, a lot of people in the media are advocating, for opinion, and they're sort of pundits. They go on TV and they tell you what to think. We are actually a firm believer in the infinite power of free people to make the best decisions for themselves. In other words, I don't pretend to know everything about everything. I don't pretend to tell you I know what the solution should be. I don't pretend to tell you what the law should be. The only thing that we focus on at Project Veritas is exposing facts. And we release the raw tape so that you can make your own determinations. You can look at Patrick Moran's behavior, and you can say, is he lying to us or is he not? Is he playing along? Of course, every single person that looks at this tape with any sense of self, any sense of fairness has said that he's not playing along. So we're really focused on exposing facts because we believe that veritas, truth, Latin for truth, that's what this is all about.
Folks, we're going to open our phone lines. Our number here, 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. If you have a question you'd like to ask of our guest today, James O'Keefe, a comment about the undercover investigation, pick up your phone, give us a call, 800-733-9829. Lines are open right now. James, you mentioned about the raw videotape. You have this right on your website, correct?
That's right. You can go to our website. You can actually watch the investigations. You can also see the raw tape that corresponds. We've come up with a new method. We release the excerpts, and then in the same video recording, the same YouTube piece, you put the raw right afterwards. And I think if other journalists were to put their raw notes, their raw materials to accompany their selectively edited articles, we'd certainly have more information available to make the decisions that we need to make as citizens. We've
talked about some of the outcome that's happened with your latest piece there in the state of Virginia, with the Attorney General now being told here by the Board of Elections there to launch investigation on some of the other projects that you've done as well. What have you seen as the outcome? Have there been investigations such as the Organizing for America headquarters visit?
There's been a tremendous amount of outcomes. It would probably take me a few minutes just to go through the list. Over the last 10 months, the outcomes of our investigations, let's go to New Hampshire. New Hampshire passed a voter ID law citing our video showing dead people's names being used to give ballots out to strangers. The Attorney General of New Hampshire, who is an adversary for some reason of mine, tried to indict me falsely, tried to say that I'm a criminal. Unfortunately, that didn't work out for him, and the state passed the voter ID law, and the federal government pre-cleared it after our video showing Eric Holder's ballot being offered to a complete stranger. That video in Washington, D.C. prompted the D.C. Board of Elections to launch an investigation. Eric Holder was in Congress being interrogated by Congressman Steve King from Iowa. The director of the FBI was interrogated about our Eric Holder voter fraud video. He claimed under oath that he never heard about it, which is suspect. Vermont video prompted the Secretary of State of Vermont to launch an investigation, albeit into me. North Carolina video showing dead people's ballots being offered to strangers launched an investigation. Minnesota launched an investigation after our YouTube video showing football players' names, Tim Tebow and Tom Brady, being used to obtain voter registration applications. And now we go to Texas, where people have been fired. The office has been shut down. In Virginia, where the congressman's son has resigned, and Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli is launching an investigation. Simply put, there is no other investigative reporting organization in contemporary times which has had more of an impact than our organization, dollar for dollar. And that's why it's so important we get your support and continue share the videos, make a donation where you can to help us continue with this mission.
ProjectVeritas.com. Well, our lines are packed with callers from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, and Wisconsin. We'll get to your calls after the break. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
A new feature-length film is now available on DVD. Amazing Love is the story about a youth director and his wife who take 5 teens from their youth group to the wilderness for 2 nights to camp out. 2 teen girls have a sharp argument that causes division. Tensions are high. The youth leader gathers all the kids and decides to tell the story of Hosea. Using flashback, the film takes you to Nazareth as the story of Hosea unfolds. It's a story of commitment, of keeping vows before God, of faithfulness and unconditional love. Through November 17th, Crosstalk is making available one copy of Amazing Love for a donation of $18, and any additional copies to the same address for a donation of $10 each. 2 copies are available for $28, 3 copies for $38, and so on. The story will impact teens and adults alike. To obtain your copies of Amazing Love, visit vcyamerica.org or call 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. We're speaking today with James O'Keefe, who is the founder and director of Project Veritas, as they have been investigating undercover this whole matter of voter fraud and some very stunning investigations in matters that they have uncovered. Folks, you can see it on their site at projectveritas.com. Project Veritas, VERITAS.com. Let's go to the phone lines. We've got Ron calling in from Mansfield, Pennsylvania. Ron, go ahead. You're on the air.
Sir, you're doing a wonderful job of exposing. I'm a retired federal agent, and here in Pennsylvania, we had a very a neutral voter ID law that has been set aside by the courts that said you have to show ID to vote. And the ACLU had a poster child, a 93-year-old black lady. She said, I can't get no voter ID. Well, then I read a 2-column article in the next week's paper, Sunday paper, and she said, well, 10 years ago her purse got stole and took her Social Security card, and she didn't have no Social Security card. Wait. And above that, she said she was adopted at the age of 4, and the name on her birth certificate, not the name she used now. So first I said, well, run both names and see if she's collecting 2 benefits of welfare.
Yeah, and we don't want to go too far down the road there, Ron, but this really begs the question here, James, that I think we have seen this go before courts, and courts have had a hard time finding valid illustrations of people who cannot obtain a proper identification card. Is that correct? James? Isn't it true? Yes. Isn't it true that courts, as cases have come before them, have had a difficult time actually coming up with securing people or finding people who actually cannot obtain a valid photo ID for voting purposes?
There was actually a incident in I don't know if this is referring to, but in South Carolina. Can you hold on one second? I'm sorry.
Okay. James O'Keefe here with us today from Project Veritas. And
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry. I'm back now.
Okay, go ahead, James.
There's just a storm here. There's a hurricane coming through the New York metropolitan area, so I apologize. I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but in South Carolina, there was an incident where people have actually offered to go bring registered voters to the polls to vote. And the voters there in South Carolina, the governor of South Carolina offered to bring them to the polls, and if they couldn't afford to get there, if they had any problem with resources, and they could only uncover less than 24 people who could needed those resources and needed that help. So there's a lot of different interesting angles to this problem, and people are trying to solve it. And it's an interesting development seeing the sort of arguments versus what manifests itself in terms of what people need.
Let's go to the state of Ohio, Geneva, Ohio, and George, you're on the air.
Yes, Jim, remember, maybe you recall as well, back after World War II, Joseph Stalin, you've probably heard this, but I'm going to repeat it. He said it matters not who votes or how they vote. What matters is who counts the vote. So that's another interesting aspect, It's very important who is counting the votes, who's watching over, the counting processes, the votes as well.
Yeah. Another issue, how you uncover some of that aspect, another challenge. But I'm confident, James, you wouldn't mind having another 50 to 100 people working for you to be investigating these kind of things.
It's interesting to hear all the support from people around the country, like, why don't you do this and why don't you I think that it's great. Support us, give us a donation, help us employ 100 reporters, but also direct your anger and indignation and curiosity to the mainstream media. These corporations have hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, and they don't do anything. They don't investigate anything.
Yeah.
They don't. I mean, have you been to some of their bureaus? They've got thousands of reporters, millions of dollars in equipment, and they're unwilling to do the investigative reporting. And they're frankly they're neglecting their responsibilities by ignoring the consequences of our investigations. Up until now, just this last one, CBS News reported on it, CNN reported on it, Fox News reported on it. But previously, it's been difficult to get traction on this issue. So I think people really need to demand the media pay attention to the issues that we expose.
To Steve in the state of Florida, you're on the air, Steve.
Thank you, Jim. We know that the election and voting out has been outsourced to a Tampa, Florida company named SOE, and recently the SOE software has been sold to a company in Spain. It's SCYTL. That's the company. The question is, how can a company that's located in Spain and it's owned by George Soros be responsible for verifying results of the American elections? We have no trust, and it's over if this is happening.
Well, your question is a rhetorical one, and one that deserves to be investigated and asked and looked into. And if we had your support and your donations, we would do a better job of being able to address 100 of these different issues in regards to foreign companies running our counting our votes and managing our technical processes. That's a legitimate concern, and whether there's an undue influence on that would be a great subject for a Project Veritas investigation to determine sort of what the influences are on these processes and whether these people, these various companies, just recently there's Facebook.com, which is a huge social networking site, Facebook, and whether people are getting registered to vote on Facebook now, and so the question is, the people who are managing this, is it being managed fairly and properly and without fraud? And of course, human nature is such that there's always going to be an undue influence on these processes.
Yes.
Thank you, Steve. Here's other information as well, James, and that is now we've got, United Nations having international body coming to monitor our elections here in this country. And here the Texas Attorney General is telling the election monitors, stay out of our state. Do we need international observers to come and monitor our elections?
That seems kind of problematic, doesn't it? Having people who are not governed by our country come to our shores and try to tell us how to operate. That there's so much waste and fraud that Project Veritas has exposed over the last 8 to 12 months, and we've got our own Attorney General who's trying to suggest that there is no problem. He says we're trying to prove a problem that doesn't exist. So I think we should probably try to straighten out our own public officials, including Eric Holder, before we have international officials trying to intervene for sure.
To Franklin and Tom, you're on the air. Hello, Tom. Okay, let's try going to Harry in Port Huron. You're on the air, Harry.
Yeah, hi there, guys. The thing I want to bring up is if you're looking for examples here, Jim, and that is, James, and that's in Michigan here. We've got our Secretary of State, Ruth Johnson, trying to clean up the voter rolls, and we have thousands of dead people on the rolls. She wants to get it cleaned up. She went to the U.S. Department, or to Eric Holder, and said, hey, we got to get this cleaned up. We need to get Social Security numbers so we can verify these people and get them off the rolls. They would not help us at all. And so if you're looking for something, there's something that's investigation. We've got that problem here in Michigan.
Well, that's a good point. Actually, if you go to our website, just 2 weeks ago, Project Veritas released a video where I interviewed a young lady from Minnesota who is registered to vote in Florida. And she has not lived in Florida in at least 10 years. And she's called up the state of Florida down in Broward County near Tampa. And she's called up, this guy's name is Earl Leonard. He's the chief of elections down there, a big election official. And he called him up and said, I want to get off the rolls because I don't live in Florida and I'm registered to vote in 2 places.
Right.
Well, she said it 4 times, and each and every time she asked, her name is Erin. Each and every time Erin asked the chief of elections, he says, I'll do it. And just recently they sent her an absentee ballot to vote in Florida. She hasn't lived there in 10 years. So she's actually said 4 times that she wants to be removed from the rolls. So, I mean, that's unbelievable.
It sure is.
You can't. You got an individual who's going out of her way to engage her civic responsibility and tell them to take her name off the rolls. She's asking them to do the moral thing, and they're refusing to do it.
That's ridiculous.
Harry,
I'm with you.
Thanks for the call. Tom in Racine, Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Jim, my question was, I have it in my mind that this is something that happens on the left and with the Democrats, and I'm wondering if there's any evidence of this type of activity taking place among, like, Tea Party groups or those who would be considered on the right side of the aisle.
Yeah, just recently, Ken Cuccinelli was being asked by, ironically enough, Jim Moran, a congressman from Virginia, to investigate an incident where a guy, we don't know too much about him except he's supposedly affiliated with the Republicans, was destroying voter registration forms in Virginia. Now, granted, this young guy wasn't a field director for a congressional campaign, which is why I think our incident is probably sort of more explosive, but still, there have been incidents there was a consulting group which was supposedly engaged in nefarious activity in Florida. There was one incident in Colorado. It was a viral video where a young Romney supporter was mistaken, and she said that she's paid to register only one group of people, which would be problematic. But what she was actually doing was doing pre-screening, which means that she was asking the people who she interacted with whether they supported Romney or whether they supported Obama. If they said they supported Obama, she would walk away. That's not illegal if you're registering voters to pre-screen. So there's been a lot of, I guess, false alarms. And certainly the incidents involving Republicans get blown up by the mainstream media, and the incidents that we uncover try to be ignored. So there's a threshold of difference for each of the different fraudulent exposés.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Our number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Pensacola, Florida. Sam, you're on the air.
Yes. I'd like to piggyback upon the comments of a prior caller in regard to the importance of who counts the votes. George Soros front companies and organizations put a lot of money into generally it's called just an ordinary election. It's a non-important election, Secretary of State. But what the Secretary of State does has the final decision in the arguments. Is it fraud, or is it this, or is it that? And I think it's very important for people to know that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the Secretary of State project, it's not something that I'm an expert in, but like I said over and over, that we want to look into every angle of this. We're actively working, and if you have a specific tip or a specific inside information about how these processes work, use it, send it to our tip line. We'll be happy to investigate and determine if there's abuses happening at every level of this election problem.
And folks, again, to send that tip, you can go to the website, projectveritas.com, and you'll see right near the top where you can report a tip. You send that report, and you can do it confidentially, and that report will get to them at their offices. We're going to take a quick break and come back for the final brief segment here on Crosstalk, as we're speaking today with James O'Keefe from Project Veritas about this matter of election fraud. This is Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. You hear the term sometimes, Reconstructionism, or he's a Reconstructionist. What does that mean? Dr. Tommy Ice defines Reconstructionism as the belief that God will bless the church's efforts to Christianize the earth. Since God's kingdom was established at Christ's first coming, godly dominion will be mediated through the church before the return of Christ. That's what they teach. that the victory of God's kingdom on earth will be during and continuous with this present era. Dr. Tommy Ice and I both disagree with Reconstructionism or Reconstructionists. We believe that we don't build God's kingdom here on earth now. We build it in the spiritual realm as we preach the gospel. Jesus said in John 18:36, "My kingdom is not of this world, it is not from here." While many of the Reconstructionists oppose the New Apostolic Reformation with its dominion theology of prophets and apostles, we still, at least I, still disagree with the idea of Reconstructionism.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. James O'Keefe is our guest today as we talk about this undercover investigations regarding election fraud and the things that they have uncovered. And folks, I believe that if they are finding this in the locations that they have visited, that is probably taking place in multiple places all over the country. Just before we go back to the phone lines, James, you're sitting right in basically at ground zero for the hurricane hitting the U.S. at this time. You're in New Jersey. Give us a first-hand report as to what you're observing there.
Yeah, the power is out everywhere, and I'm on a cell phone which is about to die. So we have 60 knot sustained winds. There's like 70-mile-an-hour winds. Trees are falling everywhere. In fact, we're close to the Hudson River where I live, and I just went over there before. I've never seen anything like it up north near the Tappan Zee Bridge where New Jersey meets New York. The waves are so great that they're splashing over the shore, and the spray hits your face. It hurts your face when it hits your face. I lived here for my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it. So we're right in the middle of one of the worst storms in history right now. Well,
we certainly invite our listeners to be praying not only for you, but for the many folk out there that are being impacted by the storm as well. Let's hit back to the phone lines here for the final minutes. Fred in Milwaukee, you're on the air, Fred.
Yes, this morning very early they had a special documentary on Free Speech TV on the cable channel 96, and it documented how to steal the vote. And they talked about how they go into the election voting machines, and company DeBolt and another one at least, they have a key that matches all the voting machines across America, and they go in before the election starts and they change the memory cards in the machine so that whatever you cast your vote for, your vote shows up under the number, but for whatever candidate they want in that particular area. It's done through programming, computer programming. And it's documented.
That's another excellent question about whether or not these machines are rigged and how they're programmed is something that, again, if you have a tip about this stuff, please send it to my website, projectveritas.com. I would love to expose some malfeasance when it comes to how the votes are counted. This is something. If there is fraud, we need to catch it on tape. We need to make it undeniable for people because right now it's all speculation. So one of our jobs is to expose it, let them answer to it, but we've got to catch it on tape.
Free Speech TV.
Thank you, Fred. Michael in Pensacola, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. I'd just like to know is this: why is all of a sudden it's important about voter fraud? Because when Reagan was in office, Bush Sr., even Bill Clinton, and George W. Why is there such a big emphasis right now, push on that? Is it just to keep people of color from voting?
Say that last part again, sir?
He said, is it just to keep people of color from voting?
Is it just to keep people of color from voting? I mean, most of our investigations have involved dead people's names being used to get people to vote. I don't know what dead people voting has to do with people of color. Dead people voting is something that is bad, and it's outrageous, it's immoral, voting rights and making sure that people's rights aren't trampled on and disenfranchised is nothing to do with racism. In fact, it's almost like the people who are racist are against our efforts to expose it. After all, what could be more racist than having people's names in Arlington, Virginia, be used to? Patrick Moran was advising us to vote in other people's names. Many of the people he was advising us to vote in were people of color. So the people who are disenfranchising your vote are not the exposers of fraud. It's the fraudsters. It's the fact that dead people's names are being used to give ballots to other people. That's the damning part. And the reason why the issue of voter fraud is being discussed is because Project Veritas has caught the stuff on tape for the first time, frankly, in I've never seen a videotape showing the Attorney General's ballot being offered to a stranger. Have you? So the reason why these issues are coming to a forefront is because citizen journalists have taken their cameras to places that no contemporary mainstream reporter has been willing to go. And that's a rise of technology, of journalism, of YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, grassroots media, bringing the truth out to people that before you never saw.
Well, in that case, we can't trust anyone because you're already saying that some of the election machines are maybe, being rigged. So how can we trust anybody?
How can you trust anybody? Well, I mean, that's a historical question. You shouldn't. You should. What's the phrase from? I don't know who said it, but it was trust but verify.
That was Ronald Reagan that said that.
We need to have more journalism in this country. The answer to all your questions are to just expose more things. I don't think we need more politicians. We need more lobbying. We just need more journalism. Because if all the fraud was caught on tape for the world to see, what you would see happen is people aren't stupid. Americans are pretty smart, even the ones who have their minds, set on a particular ideology. The American people would begin to realize how corrupt everything is. They would distrust their political leadership. They would take control over the things they need to take control over, and they make the right decisions. Right now, people are making the wrong decisions sometimes. Why? Because they don't have all the information available to them. So my mission is very simple. It's to simply expose more of this fraud, catch it on tape, put it on YouTube, and get answers from politicians.
To the state of Texas we go. Austin, you're on the air.
Hey, Gina, good afternoon. How you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Hey, I applaud what you guys are doing, and I want every fraud to be really, really flushed out, both from the left and from the right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a little disappointed by the answer you gave to one of the previous callers when the guy was asking, does that happen on the right as much as it happens on the left? And your answer was that it's just a minute thing that happens, is overblown, and I think fraud is fraud. I'm an independent mind, and whether it happens with the Democrats or the Republicans, and I think you should be able to, whether it's 1 versus 100, I think you guys should be able to investigate 1 and also investigate 100. But when you present that answer as if you're supporting the fraud that happens with the Republican, and you're defending it because you're thinking, okay, it's just 1 that happened.
Okay, we got 20 seconds. James, go ahead. Your response.
I would never defend fraud, but I'm pointing out a fact-based approach that in Colorado, the controversy surrounding the undercover video, the woman was pre-screening voters. It's not a crime to pre-screen voters. And unfortunately, we have a mainstream media which gives a tremendous amount more coverage to incidents on one side of the aisle. So you should direct your righteous indignation against the mainstream media because they're only focusing on one side. So don't direct your righteous indignation to the citizen journalist like me who's trying to compensate for where the media is lacking. I think you look at the press and you see where they're lacking.
James O'Keefe has been our guest here today. We are out of time. The website is projectveritas.com. James, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And folks, thanks for joining us here today on Crosstalk. Be in prayer regarding those that are impacted by the storm. Be in prayer for this upcoming election.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.